The neon hums against the velvet darkness of Sunset Boulevard. It's a Thursday night in January 1966, and Los Angeles breathes with a restless energy that seems to pulse through the asphalt itself. The air carries the scent of gasoline, cigarette smoke, and something harder to name, possibility perhaps, or desperation dressed in leather and denim. The Whisky A Go-Go stands like a beacon in the Hollywood night, its marquee letters glowing red and white, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, where a line of young people stretches around the corner. They wait with the patience of pilgrims, their breath visible in the cool January air, their eyes bright with anticipation for something they cannot yet name, but can somehow feel approaching. Inside, the club pulses with a different kind of darkness. The ceiling is low, painted black, swallowing the smoke that rises from 100 cigarettes. The stage is small, barely elevated, intimate in a way that will soon prove dangerous. Red lights cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow. The bar runs along one wall, bottles catching fragments of light like captured stars. The sound system, state-of-the-art for 1966, waits silent in the moments before the night truly begins. This is not yet the Whisky A Go-Go of legend. This is the Whisky A Go-Go on the edge of transformation, in those final moments before four young men from Venice Beach will walk onto that small stage and detonate something that will echo through decades. Club's owner, Elmer Valentine, moves through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who has seen trends come and go. He opened this place in 1964, brought the concept from Paris, a discotheque, they called it, where recorded music and live performances could coexist, where the young and beautiful could dance until dawn. He hired women to dance in cages suspended from the ceiling, a visual spectacle that drew crowds and cameras. But Valentine is no fool. He understands that spectacle alone will not sustain a legend. He books live bands, gives them residencies, creates a house band concept that allows musicians to develop their craft night after night before audiences who return like devoted acolytes. The Birds played here, the Turtles, Buffalo Springfield. But tonight, something different waits in the wings. Before we begin this journey, be part of our channel. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. Four figures stand in the narrow backstage area, an alcove barely worthy of the name. Ray Manzarek adjusts the settings on his Vox Continental organ, fingers moving across keys with the precision of a classical pianist, which he nearly became before rock and roll offered a different kind of salvation. His keyboard bass will have to carry the low end tonight. There is no bass player in this configuration, a detail that should be a weakness but will instead become a signature. Robby Krieger cradles his Gibson SG, fingers already finding shapes and patterns in the air, flamenco runs and blues licks interweaving in his mind. He is the youngest, barely past 20, but his musical vocabulary draws from sources both ancient and modern. Flamenco guitarists, jazz improvisers, blues masters, and something stranger, something he heard in his own head during long afternoons in Southern California suburbs. John Densmore sits behind his Ludwig drums, adjusting the tension on his snare, listening to the crowd noise filtering through the thin wall. He is a jazz drummer at heart, schooled in the polyrhythmic complexities of Elvin Jones and the subtle dynamics of brushwork, and he will bring this sensibility to music that many will mistake for simple. His playing will be about space as much as sound, about the silences between beats, the tension before the crash. He knows something about tension. He can feel it gathering in this small room, in the circuits of electricity that connect these four men to each other, and to the amplifiers that will soon project their sound into the smoky darkness beyond. And then there is the fourth figure, the one around whom the others seem to orbit whether they acknowledge it or not. Jim Morrison stands near the back wall, his face partially in shadow, his leather pants catching fragments of light. He holds no instrument. His tools are different. His voice, untrained but powerful, capable of sliding from a whisper to a scream in the space of a single breath. His body, which he has begun to understand as another kind of instrument, something to be used for theatrical effect. His words, the poetry he has been writing in notebooks since his film school days, dark imagery drawn from Blake and Rimbaud and Nietzsche and his own fevered visions. Reports suggest he is nervous tonight, though he shows it differently than others might. A stillness rather than fidgeting, a retreat inward rather than animated chatter. They call themselves the Doors, a name drawn from Aldous Huxley by way of William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. Morrison suggested it, and the others agreed, sensing something right in the word, something that spoke to thresholds and passages, to the liminal spaces between states of consciousness. They have been playing together for less than a year, rehearsing in a garage, working through Morrison's lyrics, finding the sound that will distinguish them from the folk rock that dominates the Sunset Strip in early 1966. They have recorded a handful of demos, played a few small gigs. But tonight is different. Tonight they begin a residency that will run for months, that will allow them to workshop their material before live audiences, to stretch songs into extended improvisations, to develop the musical telepathy that will define their greatest work. Ronnie. Haran, one of the club's bookers, believed in them when others remained skeptical. She heard something in their demonstration recordings, saw something in Morrison's presence that suggested star quality, that ineffable charisma that cannot be manufactured or taught. She convinced Valentine to give them a chance, to offer them a house band residency as the opening act for more established groups. 4 nights a week, 2 sets a night, 45 minutes each. It is a grind, but it is also an opportunity, a chance to fail and recover, to experiment and refine, to build a following one convert at a time. The crowd in the main room knows nothing of this yet. They have come to see the headliner, whoever that might be on this particular Thursday. Some recognize the name The Doors from flyers posted around the strip, but most have no expectations, no preconceptions. They are about to receive an education in the unexpected. The house lights dim. The red stage lights intensify. A voice over. The PA system announces the opening act, and 4 figures emerge from the wings into that small circle of crimson illumination. Manzarek's organ begins first. A hypnotic bass line that seems to pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat, or perhaps something deeper, older, the rhythm of ancient rituals conducted in firelight. The keyboard bass fills the low-frequency space, throbbing and insistent. Krieger's guitar enters, sliding notes that shimmer and twist, suggesting Middle Eastern scales and flamenco passion filtered through an electric blues sensibility. Densmore's drums find the pocket, not driving the rhythm but dancing around it, jazz inflected and subtle. And then Morrison steps to the microphone. His voice, when it comes, is not what the audience expects. It is deeper than seems possible from his frame, resonant and theatrical, drawing from some well of darkness that most people spend their lives avoiding. He does not simply sing the words, he inhabits them, becomes them, transforms them into incantations. The lyrics speak of breaking through to the other side, of days of destruction, of strange days and stranger nights. This is not folk rock. This is not the jangling guitars and harmony vocals of the Byrds. This is something else, something primal and dangerous and utterly compelling. Contemporary accounts describe the audience reaction as one of confusion, shifting gradually into fascination. People stop their conversations. They turn toward the stage. Some move. Closer, drawn by a magnetism they cannot explain. Morrison's performance style is still developing. He has not yet mastered the shamanistic intensity that will characterize his later work, but the seeds are visible. He grips the microphone stand, leans into it, pulls away, creates a physical vocabulary that mirrors the psychological journey of the songs. His eyes, reported to be intensely focused yet somehow distant, scan the crowd as if seeing through them to something beyond. The set list on this. First night likely includes early versions of songs that will become classics: Break On Through, Light My Fire, Backdoor Man, Alabama Song. But these are not yet the polished studio recordings that will dominate radio in 18 months. These are raw, exploratory, still finding their final form. Light My Fire, destined to become a #1 hit, is at this point an extended jam vehicle, stretching past 10 minutes as Krieger and Manzarek trade solos over the hypnotic rhythm section. The crowd, initially uncertain, begins to respond. Heads nod. Bodies sway. Something is happening here, some kind of communion between performers and audience that transcends the typical rock and roll transaction. Between songs, Morrison's stage presence reveals itself. He does not banter easily like other frontmen. His between-song comments are cryptic, poetic, sometimes disturbing. He recites fragments of verse, speaks of ancient mysteries and modern alienation in the same breath. Some in the audience find it pretentious. Others find it mesmerizing. No one finds it forgettable. This is the paradox that will define Morrison's career. He is simultaneously magnetic and alienating, drawing people in while pushing them away, the beautiful contradiction that makes legends. The first set ends after 45 minutes. The band exits to scattered but enthusiastic applause. In the backstage area, they assess what has happened. Manzarek, always the most analytical of the group, notes what worked and what needs adjustment. Krieger, soft-spoken but musically confident, suggests alterations to arrangements. Densmore listens, contributes observations about dynamics and tempo. Morrison, the storm around which they orbit, remains largely silent, processing the experience in ways he will not articulate, but will instead channel into performance. The second set, later that night, shows already the beginnings of evolution. They are more confident, more willing to take risks. Morrison extends his vocal improvisations, adding screams and whispers not present in the first set. The band follows him into these uncharted territories, trusting in the collective intuition they are developing. This is what the residency will allow, this nightly laboratory where they can experiment without the pressure of a one-off concert, where they can build muscle memory and musical telepathy through repetition and variation. Night after night, they return to that small stage. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 2 sets each night. The audiences grow. Word spreads along the Sunset Strip that something unusual is happening at the Whisky. Industry people start showing up. Record executives, producers, managers, other musicians curious about the buzz. But it is the regular fans, the young people who return night after night, who truly fuel the band's development. They learn the words to songs not yet recorded. They internalize the rhythms, the structures, the moments of catharsis. They become part of the ritual. Witnesses from those early months describe a band in constant evolution. Songs change from night to night. The end, which begins as a simple breakup song, starts to metastasize into something longer, darker, more psychologically complex. Morrison begins adding sections of improvised poetry, mythological imagery, Oedipal themes that will eventually crystallize into the infamous Oedipal section that will scandalize some and electrify others. But in early 1966, it is still forming, still finding its final shape through these nightly explorations. The physical environment of the Whisky contributes to the alchemy. The low ceiling creates an acoustic pressure that intensifies the sound. The intimate space means that Morrison is never more than a few feet from the front row of the audience, creating an intensity of connection that larger venues cannot replicate. The red lights cast everything in shades of blood and shadow, creating a visual atmosphere that matches the musical. Darkness. The cigarette smoke hangs in the air like incense, adding to the ritualistic quality of the experience. People do not simply attend Doors shows at the Whisky, they undergo them, participate in them, emerge changed in ways both subtle and profound. As weeks turn into months, the band's reputation grows beyond the immediate Sunset Strip scene. Articles begin appearing in local music publications. Photographers capture images of Morrison's leather-clad presence, creating visual iconography that will endure for decades. The other band members, though less photographed, gain their own reputations among musicians, Manzarek as the musical architect, Krieger as the virtuosic guitarist who can make his instrument sound like a sitar or a flamenco guitar or a screaming soul, Densmore as the drummer who brings jazz sophistication to rock dynamics. The music industry, always hungry for the next big thing, begins to circle. Multiple record labels send representatives to the Whisky to see what the excitement is about. Columbia Records, Elektra Records, Atlantic Records, all express interest. The band, still developing their sound, still perfecting their craft, must now navigate the complex machinery of the commercial music business. They are artists, poets, visionaries, but they must also become businessmen, negotiators, strategists. The tension between artistic purity and commercial success, a tension that will haunt Morrison particularly for the rest of his brief career, begins to manifest. Jack Holtzman, the founder of Elektra Records, proves to be the right match. Elektra is not a major label, but rather a boutique operation known for folk music and eclectic artists. Holtzman understands that the Doors are not a typical rock band, that they require a different approach, more artistic freedom, more patience. He attends multiple shows at the Whisky, watching the band develop, seeing the potential in their raw intensity. He offers them a contract that includes unusual creative control, trusting that they know better than any producer what their music should sound like. But before the recording sessions, before the debut album that will change everything, there are still nights at the Whisky. Still those two sets, Thursday through Sunday, still that small stage and that intimate audience. This is where they perfect the magic, where they learn to channel their individual talents into collective transcendence. The residency continues through the spring of 1966, each performance adding layers to their developing mythology. The audience demographics begin to shift as the word spreads. The initial crowd of hip scenesters is joined by teenagers who sense rebellion in the music, by college students who appreciate the literary references, by older bohemians who recognize the echoes of beat poetry and European existentialism. The Doors, perhaps accidentally, perhaps intentionally, create a big tent under which multiple counterculture tribes can gather. They are psychedelic without being flower children, dark without being nihilistic, intellectual without being inaccessible. Morrison's relationship with the audience becomes more complex as the residency progresses. Some nights he is generous, engaging, even playful. Other nights he seems to barely acknowledge the crowd's presence, retreating into himself, performing as if for ghosts or gods rather than the flesh and blood people in front of him. This unpredictability becomes part of the attraction. You never know which Morrison will appear. The poet, the shaman, the rock star, the drunk, the provocateur. The only certainty is intensity, commitment, a refusal to do anything halfway. There are already hints of the self-destructive tendencies that will eventually consume him. Reports suggest excessive drinking, even at this early stage. Accounts describe Morrison sometimes arriving at the club already intoxicated, his performance enhanced by the disinhibition or diminished by the sloppiness. The other band members learn to compensate, to cover for him when necessary, but also to harness the unpredictable energy he brings. It is a delicate balance, one that will shift and strain in the years to come. The other musicians on the strip, members of Love, Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, come to the Whisky to see what the Doors are doing. Some are dismissive, seeing Morrison's theatrics as pretentious, the music as overly serious. Others are intrigued, recognizing that the Doors are accessing something different, mining territories that the folk rock bands have not explored. Arthur Lee of Love, in particular, becomes a supporter, recognizing a kindred spirit in Morrison's refusal to conform to expectations. By summer 1966, the residency has accomplished its purpose. The Doors are no longer an unknown quantity. They have a following, they have industry support, they have a recording contract, they are ready to move beyond the Whisky's small stage to larger venues, national tours, the machinery of rock stardom. But they will return to the Whisky periodically over the next years, using it as a home base, a place to test new material, to reconnect with the intimacy that birthed their sound. The recording sessions for their debut album take place at Sunset Sound Recorders in the fall of 1966. Producer Paul Rothchild, borrowed from Elektra's folk roster, proves to be an ideal collaborator. He understands that the album needs to capture the live intensity of the Whisky performances, while also utilizing the possibilities of the studio. The band records largely live in the studio, preserving the spontaneous interaction that characterizes their best work. Morrison's vocals are often first or second takes, capturing the raw emotion that multiple passes would polish away. Break On Through, To the Other Side, opens the album with the same hypnotic urgency that opened their Whisky sets. The bossa nova-influenced rhythm, the insistent keyboard bass, the sliding guitar, the vocals. That move from urgent whisper to demanding shout, all the elements that captivated audiences in that smoky club are preserved in the recording. The song, edited down from its longer live version to fit radio requirements, loses the word high from one line to avoid drug references, a small compromise with commercial considerations that Morrison will increasingly resist. Light My Fire appears in its full 7-minute glory on the album, preserving the extended instrumental section that showcased Krieger's guitar and Manzarek's organ solos. The song, written by Krieger with lyrics polished by Morrison, combines pop accessibility with instrumental sophistication, a balance that will propel it to the top of the charts when released as a single in edited form. But the album version maintains the sprawling ambition that characterized the Whisky performances, refusing to sacrifice artistic vision for radio-friendly brevity. The album's darker moments, Soul Kitchen, The Crystal Ship, Back God, Doorman, I Looked at You, End of the Night, Take It As It Comes, The End, capture the shadows that always coexisted with the psychedelic shimmer in the Whisky performances. These are songs about alienation, desire, death, transcendence through annihilation. Morrison's lyrics, drawing from his extensive reading and his own troubled psychology, speak to the existential anxieties of a generation coming of age in the shadow of nuclear threat and social upheaval. The End closes the album, with nearly 12 minutes of Oedipal drama and apocalyptic vision. The song, which had grown organically during the Whisky residency from a simple breakup song into a sprawling psychodramatic journey, receives its definitive recorded version. Morrison's vocal performance is both controlled and utterly unhinged, moving from gentle whisper to primal scream, channeling something that seems to come from beyond his conscious control. The other musicians create a sonic landscape that is simultaneously beautiful and terrifying, Eastern modalities and Western blues coexisting in uneasy tension. This is the song that will eventually get them banned from the Whisky, a live performance later in 1966, where Morrison extends the improvised middle section into even darker territories, prompting the club's management to declare them too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much. The album, released in January 1967, exactly 1 year after their residency began, detonates across the cultural landscape. It enters the Billboard charts, and begins a steady climb toward the top. Light My Fire, released as a single in April with heavy radio promotion, shoots to #1 by July. The Doors are suddenly not just a Sunset Strip phenomenon, but a national, then international sensation. Morrison's face appears on magazine covers. The band appears on television shows, though their performances often push boundaries. The infamous Ed Sullivan incident, where Morrison is asked not to sing the word higher and does so anyway, will become part of rock and roll legend. But the foundation of everything, the musical telepathy, the performance intensity, the willingness to take risks, the fusion of poetry and rock and roll, was laid in those months at the Whisky A Go-Go. Night after night, set after set, they learned their craft, developed their vision, created the template that would carry them through the next years of meteoric fame and eventual tragedy. The small stage at the Whisky was their laboratory, their university, their crucible. The intimacy of the space, the immediacy of audience connection, the opportunity for nightly experimentation. These factors combined to create conditions under which genius could develop. Other bands had played the Whisky before the Doors. Other bands would play there after. But none would use the residency quite so effectively. None would transform the opportunity into cultural revolution quite so thoroughly. The Whisky A Go-Go in 1966 was the right place and the right time, a convergence of talent, opportunity, and historical moment that created something larger than the sum of its parts. The influence radiates outward in ways both obvious and subtle. Future bands will study the Doors' music, trying to decode the source of its power. Morrison's image, leather pants, bare chest, wild hair, microphone as weapon and lover, will be endlessly imitated, becoming a template for the dangerous rock frontman. The fusion of literary ambition with rock and roll energy will inspire progressive rock, art rock, punk rock, alternative rock, each generation finding something different in the Doors' blueprint. But beyond the musical influence, there is something else, something harder to quantify but no less real. The Doors, and Morrison particularly, demonstrated that rock and roll could be a vehicle for serious artistic expression, for psychological exploration, for confrontation with the darkest aspects of the human psyche. They showed that you could be popular and profound, accessible and challenging, commercial and uncompromising. The tension between these polarities would eventually tear the band apart, would contribute to Morrison's early death, but in those early months at the Whisky, the tension was creative rather than destructive, generative rather than corrosive. The mythology that will eventually surround the Doors, Morrison as Dionysian god or doomed poet, the band as shamanic journey or cautionary tale, all begins here, in these nightly rituals at a small club on Sunset Boulevard. The mythology sometimes obscures the reality, the hard work of crafting songs and arrangements, the discipline required to create art that appears spontaneous, the musical skill that supports the theatrical vision. But the mythology also contains truth. Something did happen in that room, something transformative and dangerous and beautiful, something that changed the people who experienced it and rippled outward to change culture itself. Years later, survivors of those early shows will speak of them with a reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. They will describe the feeling in the room, the electricity, the sense that boundaries were dissolving, that normal reality was suspended for the duration of the performance. Some will claim to have been changed by the experience, to have seen the world differently afterward. Skeptics might dismiss such testimonies as nostalgia or exaggeration, the human tendency to mythologize the past. But the consistency of the reports, the similarity of descriptions from people who did not know each other, suggests that something genuine occurred, some kind of collective transformation that transcended ordinary entertainment. The Whisky A Go-Go still stands on Sunset Boulevard today, still books live music, still draws crowds. but it exists now as a monument as much as a functioning venue, a shrine to its own history. Tourists come to see where the Doors played, where Jim Morrison became Jim Morrison. Plaques commemorate the venue's role in rock history. The building itself has changed little. The same low ceiling, the same small stage, the same dimensions that created such intensity in 1966. But the context has changed everything. The Sunset Strip is no longer the epicenter of counterculture, but rather a tourist destination, a place where history is consumed rather than created. Yet there are still nights, according to those who frequent the club, when the ghosts seem to gather, when the air thickens with remembered intensity, when you can almost hear the hypnotic throb of Manzarek's keyboard bass, the sliding wail of Krieger's guitar, the jazz-inflected pulse of Densmore's drums, the deep, resonant challenge of Morrison's voice asking, demanding, insisting that you break on through to the other side. These are the nights when the Whisky a Go-Go becomes what it was in 1966. Not just a venue, but a portal. Not just a stage, but an altar. Not just a business, but a temple where transformation occurs and legends are born. The story of the Doors begins before 1966, of course. Morrison and Manzarek met on Venice Beach, discovered their shared ambition to create something new, something dangerous. Krieger and Densmore were recruited through connections in the LA music scene, each bringing essential elements to the emerging sound. But the story truly begins at the Whisky, where potential crystallized into reality, where vision became manifest, where four talented musicians became something greater than their individual gifts suggested possible. And the story extends beyond 1966, through the years of fame and excess, through the Miami incident and the trials, through the Paris exile and the premature death, through the decades of posthumous myth-making and commercial exploitation, through the countless bands influenced and the millions of records sold, and the doors of perception opened in living rooms and dorm rooms around the world. The story continues even now, more than 50 years after Morrison's death. As new generations discover the music and find in it something that speaks to their own alienation, their own desire for transcendence, their own hunger for beauty and danger in equal measure. But the origin point remains that small stage at the Whisky a Go-Go in early 1966, where everything began, where the doors first opened, where the light first burned. Every subsequent chapter in the Doors' saga traces back to those formative months, those nightly rituals, that perfect storm of talent and circumstance and historical moment. To understand the Doors, you must understand the Whisky. To understand Morrison, you must understand the crucible in which his stage persona was forged. To understand why the music still resonates, you must imagine yourself in that low-ceilinged room, smoke in the air, red lights casting everything in shades of blood and shadow, four young men on a small stage channeling something, ancient and urgent and utterly new. The Whisky a Go-Go in 1966 was where it all began. Not just for the Doors, but for everyone who has ever been touched by their music, challenged by their vision, changed by their refusal to accept boundaries. The club was the womb, the chrysalis, the alchemical vessel in which the transformation occurred. What emerged was not just a band, but a mythology. Not just music, but a movement. Not just entertainment, but a kind of dangerous enlightenment that promised everything and delivered more than anyone expected and less than everyone hoped, and exactly what was needed in that moment of cultural upheaval. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story we've prepared for you. See you in the next story.